Hey everybody, Scott Mann here, noisechop.com. I'm going to talk about forces today in a particle system using ParticlesGPU, but it's really just a discussion of forces and how to use them and what they mean. I'm actually really only going into two of them, the radial force and the vortex force. I might look at the axial force real quick. This particle system has no turbulence in it. There's no noise anywhere in this system, which means that all of these particles are governed by a very specific non-random set of mathematical principles. And I think that makes them look different from particle systems that have turbulence, because turbulence implies the presence of some sort of air or medium that the particles, which randomizes their movement. And I think this is sort of categorically different. And I think that's why I like them, because it implies that we're in outer space. Okay, empty network. The first thing we're going to create is a circular UV. So basically a circle that is a top texture. It's represented in a top texture. And that is going to be our particle generator. We're going to have a circle, little tiny circle in the middle of the particle system, which spawns the particles. This is probably a review for a lot of you, but I'm going to just show you how to make your own UV component and save it. If that's old hat, then skip ahead. First thing we got to do is make a ramp. And I'm going to put all of this inside. So I just selected this. Collapse selected, and I'm going to put it all inside of a component called UV. And you should all just have a UV in your My Components, which I'm going to show you how to do this just in case you don't know. So I'm going to customize this component. I'm going to add an integer variable with 2 parameters in it. Okay, so it's going to be called resolution. This is the only custom component that we're going to make in here. I'm going to add that parameter. So now on my custom page, I have a resolution parameter, and my resolution is going to be 1024 by 1024. So I have that custom component. I'm going to open the parameters for this base, go inside of it, and I'm going to drop the resolution parameter onto my resolution. And now I can change the resolution of my UV, which when you use it in the future, you'll be glad that you did that. Okay, so on my ramp, I've got 2 color keys. The first one is going to have a value of -0.5. And of course, this is, we're talking about color in the instance of a ramp, but this is really in position, right? And before I forget, I'm going to change the pixel format of this to 32-bit float, because I need to be able to represent negative numbers. This is all 32-bit float, right? The top key of my ramp right here, the white one, is going to have a value of 0.5. Okay, so my circle is going to exist in space from -0.5 on X to +0.5 and -0.5 on Y to +0.5. I'm going to put in a flip so I can reuse this. And that is going to be, I can never remember this, flip X. No, bottom left. There we go. I just need to make it vertical. So now I've got -0.5 to 0.5 in the vertical direction. I'm going to drop a reorder. I don't need these parameters anymore. That's a render, a reorder, boom. And I'm going to put this guy into the first, and I'm going to tell that input 1 is red. It already is. This goes into the second. I want that one to be input 2 is going to be green, right? Because red in texture land is X coordinates. Green is vertical. Blue, I'm just going to set to 0, and alpha can be set to 1. It doesn't really matter, actually, because I'm going to rewrite it. And then I'm going to make an out. And boom. And now I have a little point cloud That is a square going from minus 0.5 to positive 0.5. Dig it? Okay, so now I've got my UV. I don't want to have to make this one every single time. So I'm going to open my palette browser and I'm going to go to my components. I could add a folder here by right-clicking on it. I already have one. And I'm going to drag my UV, which I already have in there, and then it'll be just sitting in my palette waiting for me whenever I need a UV. Yay. Okay. Now I'm going to drop a circle. This circle is also going to be 1024 by 1024. And I'm going to drop my UV into it. My UV which was once a square. I'm just going to carve a circle out of it. So the output is going to be composite and set resolution. And then instead of comping the circle over the UV, I'm just going to multiply it. Right? So wherever I have white, I'm going to get values, and wherever I have nothing, I'm going to get nothing. So now I have a beautiful little circular point cloud. That is going to be my particle generator. And then I'm going to run that right into a Particles GPU. Boom. Let's get that baby out here. Particles GPU is under Tools. Particles GPU. Boom. There it is. Okay. And now there's a lot of things internal to Particles GPU. We're going to kind of break it apart a little bit. I don't like using the internal rendering engine, for example. So we're going to make our own geocomp and render it outside of Particles GPU. When I plug my point cloud, this input is looking for a point cloud. My particle source is transferred over to what I'm inputting, and I'm inputting a little circle. So now I've got a circle in here that's spawning leaves. The leaves are just sort of, I don't even want to look at the leaves. Let's just do circles. Okay. So there they are, circles coming down. Now, coming out of Particles GPU, I want just the position. Okay. So now you can't really see it, but there are particles in here. And if I view as points, then I can see that I've recreated this, except it's just giving me pixels instead of circles. And then I'm going to use this. I'm going to call this null pos. All these pixels are, if you look at this image, of course, is pixel data, right? Positional data. And I'm going to drop that into a geo. I'm going to do this fast because I know this is autopilot for most of you. Let's create a box geometry. That's going to be, each little particle is going to be a box. Run it through a transform. We're going to drop that down to, was it 0.01? And add a null. Render and display flags. Okay, so this guy is ready to become, I'm only rendering one right now. Turn on instancing. We're going to drop this into my translate. And you want the active channel because alpha of 0 will tell it to deactivate that particle, which you want. Otherwise, you're going to end up with random particles spawning in the middle. And then R, G, and B are going to be assigned to my position. So now I've basically recreated the render network inside of Particles GPU. So I can go into Particles GPU and find their render network and just turn it off. We don't need it, and it's a waste of compute power. So there, I have a nice little geo spawning my particles. We need a camera. We're not dealing with light because we're gonna use a point sprite material. Whoops, a point sprite. A point sprite is just a very basic material that always faces the camera. And for particles, it's useful because it's just very efficient. So yeah, I can give it a color. I kind of like this gold color that I had going, and I'll kind of lighten it up, maybe turn it down. Okay. So I need a render. And now I have, I hope anybody who's seen another one of my tutorials hopefully has already in their palette a basic feedback. I don't want to waste time going over this, but this is a very basic feedback network. It's just an opacity feedback network. I'll give you a second to look at it. I've got a level coming in, which I am going to talk about, but into a null, into a comp that's set to add. The comp is dragged back into here. So I have 3 custom components, and one of them is entry opacity, okay? Let's put a null out here. Boom. Now, one thing that's weird is y is my output from the feedback square when my input is rectangular. I'm going to set this render resolution. I'm going to set mine to 4K. If you have a slower, I'm running a 3090. If you have a slower graphics card, you can do 1920 by 1080. It looks a little better on screen with the full resolution. So anyway, feedback tops are very sensitive. If you change the resolution going into them, they get stuck in the old resolution and will screw up. So if you pulse this, it'll come back to being the right size. Okay, obviously this looks terrible right now. So I'm going to push my camera back to about 60, which is going to make my particles very small. And then this custom component, entry opacity, is controlling the input level to my feedback network. Right now it's really low. But the reason for this is that when you add feedback, color stacks up on top of itself and things get really bright. So what you want to do is pull down the opacity of the data going into your feedback network to kind of equalize out that feedback, right? So you're giving it a lower opacity signal, so as it stacks up on top of itself, you don't lose the definition. And what's interesting, especially in particle systems, this is important. I'm going to set my feedback opacity, which is talking to my little level in here. I'm going to set it to 0.95, so that's a lot of feedback. I'm going to turn this down. Okay, so this is like the most basic Particles GPU rendering network where we've broken out the render, and all we're getting out of Particles GPU is the position. That's all we want out of Particles GPU. Now, let's go back to Particles GPU. First of all, the reason that these are disappearing is that I don't know why I can't see this right now. My display, I have display bounds on, but Particles GPU isn't showing it to me. Anyway, I want to make these bounds much bigger, right? So if I tell my negative planes to go to -40, I'm stretching the boundaries that are permissible to this particle system well beyond the outside of my render window. And I want to do that to the top too. So 40s for the positive limit planes, -40s for the negative limit planes. And then I'm going to increase the birth rate. Well, let's first set the maximum particles. Right now, it's set to 400,000. I'm going to set this to 700,000. I don't know what the limitations are for various graphics cards. I think I can do like 3 or 4 times this many, so this should be fine for everybody. You can lower this if it's giving you performance problems. I'm going to set my life minimum to 20. And my birth is going to be set to a laughable 10,000. 10,000. I want to make like a cloud of particles. Okay. Oh, I'm actually glad this happened. One thing that I discovered about particle systems is that the size of your particle generator actually acts as a limiting factor to the amount of particles that are spawned. And what I'm trying to avoid is having my particle system fill up here, because if you don't have enough space in your texture for each pixel that you want, it'll just kill the particles because it can't fit them in there. What's interesting is that I forgot to set the size of this circle to, I guess I had it, let's just go to 0.1. And then I'm going to reset my Particles GPU. In fact, let's throw in a keyboard chop. Keyboard in and just set the 1 button to the reset. Right, so now I can hit 1 and it'll restart my particle system. Now, remember that we're looking at everything after feedback. So everything is going to have to run through the feedback network before it fully disappears. And one of the reasons that my pixels are now, because I have so many particles, they look white even though they're spawning gold, is that they're feeding back on top of each other and they're layering up and they look white. So in order to get your color back, you've got to turn your entry opacity down, right? Way down. So this is sort of bringing equilibrium back into the system. And look at how far I've got to take it down in order to get my color back. Okay, as I was saying before, I'm sorry, I don't think linearly. The size of your particle generator ends up being a limiting influence on the amount of particles that can be pushed sort of through it, if you think of it as like a spigot, right? When I look at my null pause texture operator, I don't ever want to see this fill up past the top, because then particles are getting killed that they can't fit into the particle system. So this is actually like a way of just looking at the buffer of your particle system, how many particles your system can accommodate versus how many it's actually spawned, right? So right now I'm at about half the tank, and this is governed by the maximum particles in your simulation. The resolution of this top is going to be roughly the square root of whatever you put in here, because it's just making room for the amount of pixels that you've requested. So you can just kind of look at what I would call your sort of buffer here, and then increase. I don't think it's actually spawning 10,000 because my circle for some reason is too small. You might think it's related that like, oh, maybe it can only spawn a particle per pixel, but I ran the numbers on that and I don't think that's the case. But now I'm just going to turn it up a little bit and you'll see that it'll start to fill up my buffer here. So you can just get a sense of how many particles it's pushing into your system, and you don't want it to go over the top. So I think, what do I have here? I've got 0.12. Let's leave it at 0.12. That seems to be like a good place, and it'll with your particles living for 20 seconds and it's spawning at 10,000 particles per frame with this size of a point cloud source. This seems to give you a good equilibrium, and you don't run out of space for your particles. Okay, done. So I'm going to add a point transform to this. Okay, so I can just move my point source around in space. I'm just going to move it over to the right here, and I'll move it up a little bit. I'm ultimately going to put it back in the middle, and then I'm going to push 1 on my keyboard to restart it. So now I've got this thing in the upper right, and it's the particles are coming downward only because I have one active force. Oh, there's turbulence. We don't want any turbulence. Okay, let's just I'm going to zero all this out. Wind magnitude is 0. So the only force that is acting on this, I guess, is this. I'm actually going to turn an initial magnitude off as well. The only force that's acting is a constant -1 force. I'm going to leave that on for a second before I turn it off. And we're going to introduce our very first force. On the Particles GPU comp, it's getting extra forces from a chop inside of Particles GPU called null extra. So we got to go find that guy. Null extra is right here. And I'm going to copy just these two. These are the extra forces. That's where they're coming from. And I'm going to pop them out and put them here. And there's an error here because this is referencing some internal operator there. I just turn that back off so that force pos x is 0. So, now I'm going to take, instead of having it reference this chop from inside, I'm just going to drag this in here. So now it's referencing this force, which has no amount. So it's not doing anything. So what is this thing? Okay, this is this chop right here called constant extra force defines a spherical force that is inside of your particle space. Its position is 0, 0, 0. Its radius is 1, so it's probably going to be like, I don't know, this big. Our camera is sort of defining that, but be about this big. And any particle that touches it will be affected by it. One thing to remember, and I wish this was not the case, is that the force either is or it isn't inside this sphere. It doesn't like fade out towards the edges as I think it does in nature. So that's one unfortunate thing that you have to contend with. So if I make this force bigger, I'm going to make this force massive. This is going to be, the force radius is 50. So it's, you know, my generator is sitting out here at 13. So I know that 50 is going to be way out, you know, this sphere is like this big. If you think about it, if this is the particle world, the sphere it's going to touch every particle that ever exists in this system. And the force type is 0. What does this mean? So this is, you can look this up on derivative. This is under the Particles GPU page in the derivative wiki or whatever we call this. I'm just going to copy this right here just so I have a little cheat sheet. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and make a square, which gives me a little annotate tab. And I'm going to call this forces, and let's just paste. You got to double click in the title tab to get into here. And I'm going to paste in the names of these forces. So this force type here is a radial force, which to me implies some sort of circular business. I mean, it is spherical technically, but it's not really radial. It just, at least by my understanding of the word radial, if I turn this on, I'm going to set it to 20, which is a very big force, in fact, and it's going to pull every particle towards the center of it. So this is a force living at the origin, and it's pulling the particles toward it. And it's massive. This is like my center of gravity for my entire particle system. I'm now going to turn off the external downward force. So now all I have is a particle generator, and it's getting sucked into the middle. of my system. Now, not very exciting, I realize. This is just kind of, as I said, it's like the center of gravity of the system. It just makes sure that no particles escape from my system. And the next force I'm going to add, I can just copy and paste this. And I'm going to add this is going to be a vortex force. Now, the way to add a force is to create a join, not a merge, a join. Okay. And so let's define this force as a force type 2. Okay, a vortex. And this thing is going to have, I don't know, I'll give it a radius of 10 and an amount of 5. And then I'm going to get into these directions. Now, what does the direction of a force mean? This is a vortex force is like a circular force, like a tornado. So let me just, I'm going to set the direction Z to 1, and then I'm going to plug this into my join. And now we have our first vaguely interesting force happening. Apologies, I had my other network running. That's why my performance was so bad. Anyway, so now these particles are spawning. They're getting sucked towards the middle. And when they hit this force, they're rotated. And that is what the axis, that's what the axis of rotation means. I don't, this is sort of like a point normal. So if you consider the origin of this axis to be 0, 0, 0, and then what this point is defining, which is 0, 0, 1. Now I have it, the axis is defined as a point from 0, 0, 0 to 0, 0, 1 on direction Z. So the axis of rotation is going along the Z axis. If I increase the length of this, it actually increases the force. You can't, well, I'm going to reset. Okay, there we go. I'm going to reset my particle system now. So now we can see what's happening is they're being sucked towards the middle, and then it's hitting this sort of like spinning Cuisinart blade in the middle. When it hits it, it throws it out. And then it leaves the sphere of influence of this force until it gets pulled back in by my gravitational force. Eventually, the system comes into equilibrium and it just stops to see. It is actually active. You know, if I reset the system, you'll see this happen again. So what is the difference between the length of the axis that is defined and the force amount? There is a difference. I don't fully understand what it is, but it's the difference is subtle. I mean, increasing the force amount and the force direction Z is a little bit interchangeable, but they're in fact not exactly the same. And I had a discussion with GPT about it, and I didn't understand it. Okay, so I just shrank it back down to 1, and that created a disruption in the system, right? So you got to see some interesting behavior there, but once it achieves equilibrium again, you don't really see any activity here. So what we're going to do is automate changes to this vortex force, which is spinning on the Z-axis. Okay, so, oh, I lied. I actually am using a noise. But this is changing. Well, let's use an LFO actually, just so I'm not lying, just to prove that we don't need any noise. Use an LFO. The amplitude is going to be about 6. And the offset is going to be like 3. No, let's make it 3 and 3. No, let's make it let's make the offset 6 and then the amplitude 3. So it's moving between 3 and 9. Offset 6, amplitude 3. And I'll put this into a null. I hit Alt-N to get that. This is very fast. Let's make the frequency like 0.01 or something. So this guy is just moving very slowly, and I'm going to drag this in to the force radius. So we're going to change the force radius over time. And that is going to create a disruption to the system that's periodic because it's an LFO. We can make this go a little faster. Maybe we'll make it 0.03. So this is a purely two-dimensional system here, right? If we look at the, well, I could just look at, in fact, let's get the GeoViewer open right now. Okay. Split the network and look at geometry viewer. So now I can kind of see, I'm gonna make this window a little smaller so I have a little more room. Okay, so now we can see that this is a purely, I just want to slide you over. There we go. Purely two-dimensional, right? There's no forces that are causing it to move on the z-axis. I'm going to make this move a little faster so it's a little more fun. Let's move this to 0.08. Okay. So now at least it like looks a little bit interesting, a little more fun. So how do I get the particles to move in? Now let's just take a look at this vortex force actually real quick. If I change its axis to be, incidentally, if I put 0 here, it defaults to the z-axis as being the center of the axis around which the vortex is turning. But if I introduce y, okay, so now my axis is defined along 0, 1, 0, 0, 0 to 0, 1, 0. You can see that the force is now on my y-axis. So it's swirling around the y-axis. I don't want that. I want it to face the camera. So I'm going to change that back. But that's all that means. Force direction is generally speaking the axis of the force. Okay, I'm going to add another force. I'm going to add another vortex. So I'm just going to copy my, let's label these actually real quick. This is radial, big. This is my vortex Z. Just so I can remember what I'm doing here. I'm going to copy my original one just because I don't have all the stuff talking to it. And I'm going to call this, this is going to be vortex X, shift X, because this guy is going to operate on the x-axis, which is going to make it circle around the x-axis, which is going to give us some z data, ironically. Right now, it's just exactly the same force as the one above it. This is going to have a force radius of 10, a force amount of just 1. It's a fairly light force. And the force type is going to be 2, which is, of course, a vortex force. It's the same thing. It's just sort of rotating around. But this is creating a force that is rotating around the x-axis, which is going to... Oh, it's not around the x-axis yet. Oops. Okay, so if I set... Now, I've got a force that's circulating around the x-axis, which is going to cause some displacement along the x-axis. It's not that strong. If I cranked it up, if I cranked it up to 10, it's going to give us some pretty weird behavior, right? But the funny thing about vortex forces is they fight with each other, which is kind of what you want. But if they overpower each other, then one will just kind of come to dominate the other. This I ultimately ended up setting back to be 1 as I added other forces. So it's just giving us a little bit of disruption on, there's a little bit of a circular force, and you can see it's just kind of adding some wobble to our system here, but it is giving us some interesting results. Okay, so now we're going to add yet another force. It's going to also be a vortex force. So I'm just going to copy and paste my original radial force. I'm going to set the, let's see, the force radius is going to be 3. The force amount is 22. That's massive. And the force type is going to also be a vortex force. And so that's force type 2. And this one is also going to live on the z-axis. Now let's plug this in. Okay, so remember that this force is pretty small. It's only size 3. It's kind of living in the middle here, but you can see whenever a particle touches it, think of this as like a spinning Cuisinart blade in there. And every time something touches it, it gets flung out into orbit, and then it gets pulled back in again by my general large gravitational force, okay? So that's creating a little bit of fun in here. And you can see that it's creating a little more activity as particles get flung into the vortex that is running on the y-axis, or I guess it's the x-axis. You're getting a little more business in the z-plane. Not a ton. And now I'm just going to move this force around. And yes, I'm going to use a noise just because I promised I wouldn't use a noise. But this is a noise chop. That's different than using a noise top. Okay, I'm a liar. Give me 3 channels. I turned off time slice there. I'm going to get 3 channels, TX, TY, TZ. And I'll create a null because I'm a good person. And I'm going to, whoa, this guy, this is really fast. Let's make the period like 30, really slow, right? And then I'm going to change the position of this force with TX, TY, and TZ. So now I have this spherical force that has this like Cuisinart blade force in it, and I'm moving it around. And let's just I'm going to add a geo here, add a second geometry comp, just throw it over here. Sure, the torus is fine. I'm just using this as a marker for the force itself. We want this to live on the z-axis so we can kind of see it. That looks good. And then I'm going to just put these values into the translate of my torus so I can see kind of like where it is. Now, it's not moving very much. You can see it's moving a little bit because this is a very big system here. My camera is 60 units away. And so what we're seeing here is a pretty large expanse. In order for this thing to move much, we've got to turn this up. So I'm going to turn it up to like 6th, amplitude to 6 of the noise. Okay. So now you can see these channels are moving from +3 to -3, and it's moving around in 3-dimensional space, but it is a spherical force, remember. So anytime the sphere of 3 around this thing touches my particle system, it'll affect the particles around it. The torus is not the size of the force. I mean, I'd have to blow it up a lot. I'm just showing you kind of where the center of the force is. I might go back and turn up the input to my entry opacity of my feedback. I'm constantly adjusting this when I'm working with these things, just to get the most out of it. Now I'm going to copy this force. Okay, so I now have a force that is moving in perfect conjunction with this force. This is a vortex, a spinning force. This I'm going to make a force type 0, which is a radial force. It's just a gravity force. So that now not only is it causing the particles to spin around and give them momentum, anytime it touches a particle, it sucks it towards itself. Okay. Now it has a little gravitational force. So you can see that whenever it touches a particle, it kind of pulls it in and spins it, which gives it outward momentum. So these forces are a little bit fighting with each other, right? But eventually the vortex force, as it gets closer to the middle, will push it out of side of the sphere of influence of this force, which gives it this like really interesting behavior. Now that you understand sort of, I moved this outside, but I'm actually going to move, I'm just going to bypass the point transform, which is going to put the particle source back into the middle. I'll just zero it out. You could either bypass it or zero it out. Okay. And now I'm going to go to my render and I'm going to tell it to only render Geo1 because I don't want to see my little particle indicator, because now it's starting to look like what my actual, the force radius of this in my original network was 10, which is much bigger. So the force that's moving around is creating, has a much bigger gravitational force. So it's sucking more particles into it, which is what kind of gave it that like wild look. This incidentally is kind of like the most important force in the system. You can play with your camera a little bit. Do we want to zoom in, maybe get closer to this thing? The other thing I did just to make the particle system kind of interesting is, well, yeah, let's do this. You can just create a noise chop and, I don't know, create 3 channels for RGB. And then you can go into your texture and just tell it to change colors. I mean, this is affecting all the particles in the system. You could create a noise so every particle had a different color. I kind of prefer them to have the same. I think I'll make the amplitude of this 0.5, so it's not so crazy. And then let's just slow this way down. Where is it? The period, let's set to like 30. So these are very gradual changes. Maybe we put in an offset here. Let's offset this by 0.5 to keep our colors like a little bit of brightness. So offset 0.5, amplitude 0.5. And then you can adjust this as needed. You know, remember, if you brighten coming in, you get that kind of brittle looking. You got to keep all this in a nice equilibrium. So that is just an expose of the use of forces. I've done things with this where I use a connect to control that, where it gathers a hand position, and then a hand position would control the position of a forces. So in an interactive, you could have a big crazy particle system and you can move your hands around and move around the position of these forces. And that's like a really interesting approach. You can even then plug that into stream diffusion and have a particle system kind of appear to be drawing stuff. You know, if you make something with this network and you discover something about forces, spiral force, I'd love somebody to explain to me. I would love to check out what you guys do. Okay, that's over now.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.